Guys, it's Kylie Draws here. Because it is a new year, it only feels right to have a video where I redraw my old art. This isn't the first time I've done this on the channel. I'm pretty sure this is the third video where I redraw my old art. If you finished this video and you enjoyed it, check out the other two videos. I'll put the link in the description, and while you're at it, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on other things like this. The piece of old art that will get redrawn today is this one that I drew in 2022. I was going to choose an illustration from last year, but this one just stood out to me when I was looking at some old art, and it looked fun to redraw. The original drawing was called Blue Skies, but I spelled it wrong on the file name, so instead of spelling skies as S-K-I-E-S, I spelled it as S-K-Y-S. A little bit embarrassing, but anyways, on to the explaining part. I just wanted to share that little part because I thought that it was just kind of funny. I skipped the sketching part in the recording because I ended up doing two sketches in one, just to get, the rough shapes in and a second sketch in pink to work on details. For the first sketch, I used just the pen brush, which is the same brush that I used when doing the line art, but I just make the size of the brush a little bit bigger so then I can kind of block out shapes and stuff. And for the second sketch, which was in pink, I used a pencil brush which has a little bit of transparency to it so that I can see the rough sketch that I did before and I can still, work out details and stuff. I did end up spending way longer than I expected on this illustration. I thought that I would just spend at least 2 hours, which is the average time I spend on illustrations like this, but it ended up taking over 4 hours to finish, which is a slight problem when YouTube recommends long form videos should be around 15 minutes maximum. I tried speeding everything up the most I could, but without any cuts in the footage, the video would be over half an hour long, and personally, I'm not too keen on writing scripts that long, and not to mention speaking for over half an hour straight. This script alone took me almost an hour to write, and it's over 1,000 words. I think it's 1,200 or so. But yeah, for the line art, I used a dark brown color and the pen brush set to a size of 5. This is just so I can have everything cleaner and line arted before I start the coloring and shading. I'll end up changing the color of the line art in most parts of the drawing later in the video so that it blends in more with the color of the part of the drawing, if that makes sense. Now you can see me filling the base colors in, keeping to the main color palette of the original drawing. The original piece had a very desaturated and muted colors look, which is very different to how I color now, which is using more vibrant and contrasting colors. I did use bold colors just for the base coloring and rendering, but I do end up making the colors more saturated and a little darker in post-processing. I'll talk about that a little bit more in a later part of the video, after this very long coloring and rendering section. I think I'll add some timestamps in the video so that it's easier to see the different sections of the drawing process, because, warning, I skipped half of it. For the shading, I decided to take a shot at the 3-step shading process, but I put my own spin on things because, that's just what I do. I wanted to go for the more painterly look of the old drawing, but still fit into the vibe of my current style. I think it just ended up a little bit shinier than I expected, especially when I fully rendered the fence thing in front of the character. You'll see it when I actually, color and render everything. What I did was color drop the base color of the part I'm shading, and cell shade the part on a clipping layer set to multiply. After that, I made a new layer also set to clipping and used a darker color to color bucket large chunks. I then erased the lighter parts using an airbrush. I actually used the airbrush a lot in this illustration, but I think it turned out really nice. I especially really like how I shaded the hands. It's just the basic idea of how I shade. It might not make a lot of sense just listening to now, but I'll try and make a shading tutorial for clothing sometime later in the year. But if I do, just try and understand that I only learned to shade clothing wrinkles and just fabric stuff in general since last year June. And it most likely will not be the most accurate. At least it'll probably explain the shading style in more detail than how this video explains it. Also, you can see I did end up drawing the lower half of the clothing because I initially was going to have gaps in the wood fence thing, but after rendering it, it looked really flat compared to the other things in the drawing, so I made it more 3D and it ended up covering the whole lower half like in the original. It was a little sad that I spent so much time on rendering the skirt and kind of the undershirt, but yeah, I'm still glad that I rendered the whole piece because it still could have proved helpful, I guess. Either way, I had lots of fun shading the clothing personally, and yeah, personally I think I'm getting better at it. I think that's all to explain for the shading. This process took up most of the time in this video, and I don't think I'll be able to cut any more of this footage because the jump cut will be too much, if that makes sense. For example, you know, as you can see, I'm doing the highlights of the hair, but if I cut it right now and then jump straight to doing the background and stuff, it would kind of be, I don't know, a little bit too early, if that makes sense. Just personally, I think I should show most of the shading process. But yeah, I guess I'll just cue the music and I will be back when I start drawing the background. And we are back. So for the background, I also skipped a large chunk of the footage, which included rendering the fence and drawing the clouds. Most of this footage is actually just adding a few extra background and foreground elements to add a bit more movement in the illustration. Fortunately, I downloaded some background brushes, like a clouds brush and a stamp brush that has birds. So for the clouds brush, as you can see in the background, it looks like clouds because the brush basically has a texture that kind of looks like how clouds would look. It's not the most realistic, but who said we're going for realism here? Personally, I'm not the best at drawing backgrounds, but these brushes really carried the whole process and made it so much easier to do the background. In the foreground, I decided to add some shadows of a few birds flying above the character. I did this by using the bird brush and putting on a new layer above everything else. I then erased the parts where the birds would touch the sky layer. Now that I think about it, I could have just made the foreground layer set to clipping and I wouldn't have to erase the parts. Whatever. Anyways, I set the foreground birds layer to multiply and put a bit of Gaussian blur on it to make it more shadow-like. I also used an airbrush set to add and put some sunlight rays on the left side of the canvas. I also messed around with some overlay gradients after taking a short break. Like I said earlier in the video, the illustration you see right now isn't the final version, and I ended up saturating the colors by a lot, making them way more vibrant than they look right now. I didn't end up recording this process because it was just a last minute thought before I started editing this video, and I kind of already had all the clips in the kind of video editing thing, if you know what I mean. And yeah, at the very end, as you can see right now, I'm just adding a bit more texture to the drawing by adding a kind of paper brush. So I downloaded lots of brushes and a lot of them are just for adding, overlay texture to the overall drawing. It's subtle, but I think it changes a lot. I don't know. I've just seen other artists do it and just, decided to follow along. That is kind of all I have to say about the background. The rest of the footage is just me messing around with the filters and making more gradient layers and more layers that I most likely will not use, and just playing around with layer settings. I guess we'll just skip ahead to the final product. And here it is done. So here's the original version, and we slowly transition to the redraw. It was really fun to see this come together, and I think I improved a lot in 2 years. Let me know what you think in the comments. Anyways, that's all for this week. Until then, bye!